The numbers don't lie, and they're telling a story that should terrify every Democratic strategist in America. In a political earthquake that's reshaping the landscape, men across every demographic, and that's white, Black, Latino, young, old, college educated, and even the working class, are fleeing the Democratic Party in numbers not seen since the civil rights realignment of the 1960s. This isn't just about one bad election cycle. This is about a fundamental shift that threatens to unravel decades of Democratic coalition building and potentially lock Republicans into power for a next generation. Hey everyone, it's Delania. Today I'm doing a deep dive into the massive exodus of the Democratic Party and what is the magnitude of this crisis. I did a video last week about the devastating data, and I will link that video in the show notes. And so I was kind of looking at what was going on between the 2020 and 2024 elections. The Democratic Party witnessed something completely unprecedented. They lost ground among men in all 30 states that track voter registration by political party. All 30 states. The party that once commanded the loyalty of the working class men across America now faces a staggering 4.5 million voter swing towards Republicans. This is like a political travesty that experts warn could take years and years to bridge. But here's what the hemorrhaging actually looks like. So I just kind of looked at some stats here, and it is dismal. So, over male support for Democrats dropped from 48% in 2020 to just 42% in 2024. Amongst young men aged 18 to 29, Democratic support plummeted 55 to 46%. And I actually have three boys in this demographic. I have 13, 21, and 22. And my boys, I tell you, will never, well, as far as I can see in the near future, those boys are never voting Democrat. For what they've been seeing that's going on within just coming out of schools and the DEI initiatives and just the overall feel within the schools and the LGBTQ community, and they feel like it's just being pushed on them and pushed on them. So I get like those boys are so far off, they're not even considering looking at the Democratic Party. So it's amazing how far that they've fallen with the male perspective. You also have the Black male support fell 7% points. Latino men support crashed by 12%. And you got to think about that for a second. The Democrats are all for immigration and immigration. And so their Latino support crashed 12 points. So you have to think that immigration has to affect those Latino men. Either they have family members or they themselves were immigrants, and they're not even getting the support from them. Then you even have college educated men. Long a Democratic stronghold saw a 6-point decline. But perhaps the most alarming for Democrats, for the first time since 2018, more new male voters are registering as Republicans than Democrats. The trend that powered Democratic victories for decades has now, it's just completely stopped. It's not only stopped, it's reversed. So here is the geographic spread, and it is looking very, very red. This isn't just confined to the red states either. We're swing states. It goes from California to New York, from Texas to Pennsylvania. Men are changing their party registration or simply walking away from the Democratic politics altogether. In Pennsylvania alone, over 160,000 former Democrats switched to Republican registration between 21 and 2024, while only 58,000 Republicans made the reverse journey. The suburban counties that Democrats thought they had captured showing troubling signs, counties around Denver, Atlanta, Pittsburgh, and Cleveland, those areas swung blue in the Trump era, and they're witnessing significant male voter defections back to the GOP. And again, they're losing their male voters. And so I really wanted to have a look at what is causing this. And like I said, I like to back things by the facts and see where the trends are going and talk about the data and what that shows, as opposed to, I do of course have my own feelings and opinions, but what is the data saying behind this? Because obviously the men are losing when they're going in droves. So what is causing this exodus? one of them is like the economic anxiety. And I think that the male workers, they feel absolutely invisible. And for the first time, and perhaps the most fundamental reason men are leaving in the Democratic Party is economic, but not in the way most analysts understand it. While Democrats focused on broad economic metrics, men experience a different reality. Traditional male dominated industries such as manufacturing, construction, mining, transportation, they faced a disruption without adequate Democrat response. The party's green energy transition, well, it is environmentally necessary for sure, but it felt like an attack on their livelihoods without offering any viable alternatives. Young men, in particular, report feeling that traditional economic milestones like buying a home, starting a family, or achieving financial independence had become impossibly out of reach. They don't see Democrats addressing their specific economic struggles, instead, perceiving the party as focused on the other demographic groups. I heard a guy, he was a Latino guy from Las Vegas, and he was part of the one of the pollings there, and he said during the campaign, Harris focused on having Beyonce and Lady Gaga on stage, but what does that have to do with me? I'm trying to move up in life. So they're not appealing to those men, and that was just one example. There it goes across the board. The next thing is the cultural alienation and the masculinity crisis. And this term, like toxic masculinity, has become overused. And it was originally intended to critique harmful behaviors evolved in progressive circles into something more broader, often seeming to be like it's supposed to like paint traditional male traits like competitiveness, risk taking, or wanting to be a provider as inherently problematic. Men across political spectrums report feeling that the Democratic Party views their gender as an obstacle to progress rather than potential ally. Survey data reveals men feel caught in a no-win situation around the meaning of being a man, with Democrats promoting fluid masculinity, emphasizing empathy and sensitivity, while Republicans embrace the traditional masculinity of strength and provision. The rise of cancel culture has been particularly affected by men who report feeling they must walk on eggshells in professional and social situations. Always one sentence away from disaster. DEI has definitely affected the white male. And this has happened with my own, like my one of my three boys. He's 22. He wants to be a pilot. He was trying to get into this pilot program. It is one with one of the major airlines, but they have DEI practices. And he was getting pushed down the list because he's a white male. So it took him over a year and a half to get into this program. And he was on all the Reddit feeds because other people had applied and they're like, oh, I applied so many months ago. And this person applied last month and they got in. And I've been waiting for 6 months and I didn't get it. Anyways, it was just pretty much a clusterfuck. And when we went to the first like orientation, I think there was like 22 students in the original orientation, and two of them were a white male. And so my son's probably a year and a half into it now. He's still in. And I asked him like how many, because he was saying they're dropping off like flies. Because not only one, because it's DEI, they dropped the requirements to get in. So they were bringing in a lot of people that probably weren't even qualified to be there. And he said that they're just like literally dropping off. So out of that original class of 22, I think there might be three left. And he's one of the three that are left that are still in the program. And this is like an 18-month program. So they drop they drop all the requirements. And I remember when we were doing the orientation, they had you could study there, you could live on campus there, and they wanted to have at that point they wanted to have 50% male female ratio. So they were going to dedicate one kind of sleeping hall to the boys, and then we're going to have one for the girls. And so their goal, it was to have 50-50. But I'm under the camp, like the best person for the job, especially when it comes to being a pilot. I want the best person for the job. And my son is like, he's like, you can't come around my friends because he's just afraid I'm going to say something that's like against DEI. And then he would get in trouble. And he's like, you need PR training. You can't talk about it. And I can't even mention what airline it's with because it is a major airline. And he's like, you're just going to like get me in trouble for saying I'm going to get him in trouble for saying that I think it should be the best person for the job. And I don't care if you're white, black, Chinese, Hispanic. I don't care. I don't care what you are. I just pick the best person for the job because you have lives in your hands. And he would get in trouble for saying that. At one point, he had a party over at our house because we had a pool, and he invited his friends over. And he's like, "You can come out and say hi, but that's it. And then you got to go back inside because he's afraid I'm going to say something that's going to get him in trouble." Anyways, I stuck to it. I didn't want to get into trouble, but my only thing is my only issue is best person for the job, and yeah, that apparently you can't say that. The second thing, or the third thing actually, what's part of the problems with the Democratic Party is the female leadership factor. Data reveals an uncomfortable truth that Democrats must confront male support for the party that drops significantly when the presidential nominee is a woman, then recovers when a man leads the ticket. From 2012 to 2016, with Hillary Clinton as the nominee, Democratic support amongst white, non educated men dropped 6 points, and it rose 2 points in 2020 with Biden, then dropped another 3 points in 2024 with Kamala Harris. This pattern holds across racial groups. And this isn't necessarily about conscious sexism. Many men who voted for Obama twice struggled with Harris. It reflects deeper issues about how men perceive their place in a party led by women, particularly when the leadership seems to prioritize specific female concerns. I also believe, aside from all this data, Harris was a weak candidate. She was horrible. She was like word salad galore. I couldn't even listen to her. I'm all for having a woman in power, and her status, but she cannot communicate. You can ask her a direct question, and she could not answer the question. I used to do debate when I was at university, and part of the thing when you're debating is like someone says these 5 points, and you have to argue against those 5 points. You got to say, okay, I hear your 5 points, and this is my counter to those 5 points, and here's 5 more points of why I think you're wrong. Like they would ask her a question, and she would have no response. I listened to her multiple times. I have no idea what her view is on anything, and it's just when you start doing the world salads, like anybody with half a brain, you lose them, you know. And I got a lot of that feedback from the last videos I did. And another thing they said, they didn't choose Harris. They were like, she was put upon us. They did not elect her as a leader. And that's very evident. I don't think if the Democrats had a voice and a vote into this, the only reason she was the candidate is because they put her there. There was no like election. She did not get elected to that position. And the only reason they did that is because she was already in the ticket. So the funding that they had accumulated, they would have had to give all that money back, bring in a new client, and then refund the new client. And they didn't want to do that. But anyways, I found some of these stupid quotes that she said. One of this, it is time for us to do whatever we have been doing, and that time is every day. I don't know what that means. You know, Again, and then even with the feedback, and that's another thing I heard too with a lot of the comments I had from my last video is like, she wasn't even like, she was so out to lunch, like she wasn't even following, like they were trying to get her back on track, and she just kept saying the same shit over and over again. Like Kamala Harris drops unburdened catchphrase again, despite mockery. What can be unburdened by what has been? I don't even know what that means. I have no idea what that means, and I probably heard her say that, I don't know, 50 times in all her speeches. I just don't get it. So, and I'm a fence sitter. I could go either way depending on the candidate, and I just could not. I could not. And that's part of the other problem too. And I was talking about this with someone the other day. I said, you have someone like her, who I don't think is a particularly intelligent person, so I'm not going to vote for her because I don't think common sense is in her wheelhouse. I'm just going to vote for the other person because I can't go vote for her. And when I told the story about my daughter and the furry and everything, it's like when I walked out of that school, my daughter got suspended for saying something negative to a child that dresses up like a dog, and I'm supposed to acknowledge that, which I don't. And she gets suspended. I'm walking out of that school and going, whoever that party that identifies with letting children be called dogs or walk around the school being a dog. Like, I don't live in that world. So whatever world that is, I'm not voting for that world. So whoever is on the other side, be it Trump, be it Ronald friggin' McDonald, I don't care. I'm voting for the other side because that side is batshit crazy. So I think that was a lot of it too. Being male or female, they were just voting against the bullshit. And that brings me to the identity politics, and they're completely displaced at this time. Men increasingly feel marginalized by the Democratic Party identity based approach to politics. The party's messaging framework consistently highlights specific demographic groups, especially like women, racial minorities, the LGBTQ, and all of them. Americans, they rarely address men as a distinct group with their own unique concerns. When men's issues are discussed, it's often in negative terms and addressing toxic masculinity, male privilege, or men's role in perpetuating inequality. But the positive masculine traits and male specific challenges, which they do have, and that includes like higher suicide rates, to educational struggles, to workplace deaths in those really, physically challenging jobs. They rarely receive serious attention from Democratic leaders. And here's another interesting poll. Research shows that only 27% of young men view the Democratic Party positively, with many reporting they feel invisible in this whole Democrat coalition, which is very sad. And then we go to the media and the messaging. It's so mismatched. So, Kamala Harris, she must have seen the data saying that they're losing that male vote. And where does she go? She goes on Call Her Daddy. I don't know. My boys hate that podcast. They would never in a million years listen to that podcast ever. So, not that she shouldn't have done it. She should have done it, but she should have then left there and gone over to Joe Rogan and did his show. Or if she wanted to support a female, go on Megyn Kelly, go on Candace Owens, be challenged. I always thought if I was in her position, those are the first places I would go. The first place I would go if I was leading the Democratic Party and I thought my message was right and I had a passion for what I believed in, the first place I would go is Fox News. The first place I would go is Joe Rogan. I would throw me in the lion's den and let me show you how I think my way is better. And she just avoided that like the plague. I don't have any support for that. They failed catastrophically in reaching men through their preferred data channels. While the party focused on traditional media appearances and female skewing platforms, Republicans dominated male-oriented spaces. Look at Trump. He went straight to, and Joe Rogan used to be a Democrat. Trump's appearances on Joe Rogan podcast had over 30 million plus listeners, and they was predominantly male listeners. And then he went on the Nelk Boys, and they all have this other like bro culture, and it shows directly are reaching towards those young men where they consume this content. The message was simple: I see you, I care about you, and the other side thinks you're toxic. And Democrats offered no counter narrative in these spaces. They're seeding an entire media ecosystem too. It's all about the Republican. The Republicans had it down. For Trump to go on Rogan for 3 hours, he had a lot to say. My boys, the 18 to 22-year-olds, they listened to the whole entire podcast. They would never listen to Call Her Daddy. Never, never. She should have went on the Rogans, and you know, it's unfortunate because I think she would have been having Candace Owens or Megyn Kelly, would have been a great interview. I would have listened to that, and really do think it would have been appealing to both the female and the male demographics, 100%. And then you have Obama, and I remember listening to the speech that he had, and I could not believe the way that he was talking to the male supporters. It was like a lecture. It was like, you can even say like he's lecturing them. They don't need a lecture. They need someone to listen to them and their problems. And they don't need to be told by Obama that what they need to do and who they need to vote for and that they need to support. It was the perfect encapsulation of the Democrats' problem with the male voters was that speech with Barack Obama in October. His appearance was just it was dismal. And it was the first he was like the first Black president. He is still one of the most influential voices in the Democratic Party. And again, he was perceived as just scolding Black men. And, he said, like, part of me makes me think that, well, you just aren't feeling the idea of having a woman as president, and you're coming up with other alternatives and other reasons for that, Obama said. You're thinking about sitting out or supporting somebody who has a history of denigrating you because you think that's a sign of strength. And as soon as he said that, the backlash was, like, immediate, and it was very, very revealing. Black men, historically, the most loyal Democratic constituencies, they pushed back, and they pushed back hard. They did not wanna be lectured about their voting choices. The whole social media erupted with responses like, "I don't need to be lectured," and "We're having a boomerang effect with all their strategies." One of the former, senators, her name here's another headline. Obama in blunt term tells Black men to get over their reluctance to support Harris. I think maybe they thought that Harris was an idiot, just like I did, just my opinion. Again, just my opinion. So Nina Turner, she's like a former Ohio State senator. She really kind of summed it up really well. She said, Black men are socialized in the same patriarchal society that every other American man is socialized in. Yet, when Hillary Clinton ran in 2016, 81% of the Black men voted for her, while only 32% of white men did the same. You know, the men are speaking, and they're speaking in votes. The Pittsburgh movement just showed how even the party's most skilled messengers, they could not bridge it. What he was trying to do was bridge the divide, but it just became worse and worse. It was their traditional rhetoric it's not working. And not only is it not working, they're doubling down on it, which I think is the biggest problem. So then I was thinking, like, I always truly believe that sometimes when you have a problem, or especially in politics, you have to go look back in history. And that's what I was kind of did a deep dive into history. How can they is it possible? Can they realign themselves? Has this happened before? Have they been coming from behind and come back to the other side? And the answer is yes. So it'll be very interesting to see if they can learn from these past lessons. And one of them was, the complete realignment with the whole progressive era. American political history offers both warnings and hope for Democrats facing this huge male exodus. Previous party realignment showed that dramatic shifts can be reversed, but only through really fundamental strategic changes. And this one was the most relevant. The New Deal realignment of the 1930s, Democrats under Roosevelt successfully built a coalition that included both progressive urban voters and conservative white Southerners by focusing relentlessly on economic populism while soft pedaling the cultural issues. And they called this approach the Big Tent approach. And it dominated American politics for over 3 decades. And then you have the Southern strategy. This was back in the 1960s and 70s, and shows how parties can systematically capture opposing constituencies. Republicans successfully converted, while Southern Democrats through coded cultural appeals while maintaining their business-friendly economic policies. And most recently, you had there's another approach called the triangulation, and Bill Clinton used this very well. And in the 1990s, he demonstrated this by how the parties can overcome these disasters. And after a devastating loss in the 1988, Democrats moved toward the center on both economic and cultural issues, and they captured suburban voters and even rebuilt their coalition. And so the Peter Buttigieg, he's working on doing this right now, and I'm going to talk about him later as some of the people that I think could be leaders in the Democratic Party going forward. And he's trying to take this approach, and that is really trying to find the middle and trying to pick out those issues that the Democrat or the progressives are winning on, and seeing if he can get the Democrats closer to the middle and kind of recapture some of the positive things. And I think one of the ways they did that too with an election was the no tax on tips. That was originally a progressive policy, and they adapted that because they could see how popular it was. So the path forward for the Democrats, like, what are they going to do? But they need to recover the male voters. They need a fundamental strategic realignment across 5 key areas. And this is strictly in my opinion. Like I said, I really did a deep dive into this, and I really wanted to analyze what was really going on here. So here's these, and like I said, is it just my opinion? Um, my dad always used to say, your opinion's worth as much as someone is willing to pay for it. So free opinion, strictly my opinion, but here's like the 5 things that I think that they need to do to kind of recapture the men's vote. And they need to return to populism. And that is like just your regular bread and butter economic issues that affect working men directly. That means infrastructure investment, manufacturing job creation, and addressing the housing crisis that prevents young men from achieving traditional milestones. One of my sons is just getting ready now to buy a house, and the prices are so high, and he makes a good living, and it's like it's just slightly out of touch. And it's that needs to change. And I also think with this populism, it's like it feels like the Democrats have become the party of the elite. So those working class men have nothing in common with those elitism. And when you have Barack Obama scolding you and talking down to you, to me, it pisses people off and it makes them go away. So they have to bring back the populism. They also need some cultural moderation. They need to tone down the rhetoric about masculinity and gender roles, acknowledge the traditional masculine traits, strength, protection, provision. It can be positive forces while supporting gender equality. My boys are big, big, big listeners of Andrew Tate. And I never even heard of Andrew Tate before, but all of a sudden my boys started talking about this. Andrew Tate said this and Andrew Tate said that. And I'm like, who's this Andrew Tate guy? So I had to start listening because I'm like, I want to know what they're listening to. And I know that he's very extreme on the other side when it comes to masculinity traits and all that. But it's almost like I'm just talking about boys and my experience between that age group of, the teenagers and the, young 20s, that's they're so bombarded with all this other crap and the DEI and the wokeness. They're grasping. They're not, like, it's like a boomerang. They're flying over to the other side. They're flying over to the masculinity side. Like, that guy's a man. I'm going over there because this over here is bullshit. And what I found was most interesting, I think it was in my daughter's school, and she was like 14, I think 13, 14 at the time. So she's in middle school, and it was right after Christmas, so they were all talking about what they want. What's their New Year's resolution? What do they want to happen in the next year? And this is when Andrew Tate was in jail. My daughter came home and they said one of the boys, 14-year-old boy in school, said what he wants in the New Year's for Andrew Tate to get out of jail. And I was like, wow, that it's amazing how a guy like that has so much influence over the men, and they're listening to them, and they listen and they follow him. And he, to me, is the extreme of masculinity. Like him or hate him, what I think is so appealing to him is that he's so much far off the spectrum of the woke bullshit on the other side. It's like the boys are running from the woke bullshit and they're running towards the Andrew Tates of the world. And it's just the way it is. It's just got one extreme. They're going from one extreme to the other, you know? Yeah. It's very, very interesting, and that's when we come down to the media and the media strategy. And that's why Booker here, he's starting to get onto the social media because they don't have a Joe Rogan. They don't have an Andrew Tate. They don't have a Nick Fuentes or that I know of. Like, I don't have, and no one's standing out. So they really need to work on their media strategies. They must meet men where they are, not where the Democrats wish they were. This means significant investment in male oriented podcasts, gaming platforms, and streaming services. And whatever Gavin Newsom is doing is definitely not working. His podcast was a disaster. So they also need positive male messaging. Here it says the Democrats want the male vote without actually having to work the male vote. Develop like positive stuff around masculinity that includes men as partners in progress rather than obstacles to overcome. They need to celebrate male contributions to society while addressing legitimate concerns about inequality. Leadership diversity is also very important. You know, like I said, we go back to the DEI. Consider whether the party's overwhelmingly focus on female leadership might be inadvertently alienating male voters, which it is. And it doesn't mean abandoning support from women leaders, but rather ensuring male voices have prominent places in the whole party's hierarchy. These voters' voices are getting lost, and the evidence shows that these voters are they're almost might be permanently lost. They're literally politically homelessness, especially those ones in the middle. They don't want to vote for the woke bullshit, but they also are not the extreme on the conservative side. So where are they? They're literally homeless. They want to maintain their liberal views on climate change, gun control, economic inequality, but they're not becoming conservative Republicans so much as they're rejecting progressive cultural politics. And here's where I think there's this a key insight. These men are still available for a party that speaks to their concerns and treats them as value coalition members rather than problems to be solved. That's where I think that I don't know what's happening with Elon Musk's America Party, but I really do think that his vision for this America Party was to capture those that are in the middle that don't want the extreme left, they don't want the extreme right, but they want somewhere where common sense is in the middle. And that brings me to the old school versus the new school battle. My parents are like as left wing as left can go. They're very old school. So no matter who is on the right or how bad the left is, they will never, ever, ever, ever in their lives vote right, no matter what. But that those are a dying breed. There's not many like die hards. Like that generation is moving out and there's a new generation moving in. And then there's this internal battle that's going on for the future. And the one side, the old school Democrats, and that's like Bill Maher, who argue the party has gone too far left on cultural issues and need to return to economic populism. And on the other side, you have younger progressive activists who view any accommodation to male concerns as just capitulating the whole patriarchy. I saw these quotes from Bill Maher. He says, people say to me all the time, you know, uh, now you're talking negatively about the left. He said, yeah, because they're dumber than they used to be. And the writer's also dumber too, which is very true. And he said, this election was very much about what I've been saying here and lost a lot of fans for saying over the years that the country has had enough of the anti common sense woke bullshit. Amen. That it's just the bullshit. It's the lack of common sense that I think has left the DNC building. Common sense has left the Democratic Party. And I don't know if they need to get it back. Not that I think they can, but they have to stop being so extreme on the leftists and come back to common sense. It goes back to the triangulation. They need to adopt some popular issues that might be on the right side, but they have to bring it somewhat to the middle. And the battle just isn't about messaging. It's about the soul of the party. The progressive wing, concentrated in the universities, nonprofit organizations, and major metropolitan areas, has significant institutional power within the Democratic Party. They control much of the party's infrastructure, from campaigns, organizations to voter registration drives. But their approach is proving electorally toxic. With the very voters, Democrats need to win national elections, and that is those in the urban areas, those that aren't in the not educated working class. They're losing that demographic, and that's eventually going to lose elections. So I also thought, like, who are some potential male Democratic leaders? Like, who is next? Who is upcoming in this party? The party desperately needs male leaders who can speak authentically to other men without alienating the progressive base. And here are just some of my opinion on particular, like, that have potential in being one of those leaders. One of them's like Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania. He is great leader. You have Andy Beshear. He's successfully elected. Both of them were successfully elected in purple states, and they are able to blend the economic populism with the cultural moderation. And again, that's why I go back to Pete Buttigieg. Despite being gay, Buttigieg's military service and Midwestern sensibility could appeal to male voters. And then you have the labor leaders and working class voices. The party needs to elevate men who come from genuinely working class backgrounds. The counter examples of what doesn't work, and that is Gavin Newsom. He represents exactly what doesn't work. He's polished, he's affluent, he's coastal elite persona. It is combined with aggressive progressive positions, and he always flip-flops on every single issue. He embodies everything that drives male voters away from Democrats. His national ambitions may be popular in Democratic primaries, but they're electoral poison in general elections. He is very well spoken. He looks the part, but there's something that's just not authentic about that guy. He will never. You have a guy like him, you know, well dressed, well spoken. He is an elitist. He's well off. He's just not resonating with the working class voters. And then you have someone over here like Donald Trump, same thing. He's an elitist. He's a rich guy, but for some reason, he can get his hands dirty. He can get down, and he is resonating. Agree or not agree, he got that vote of the progressive, well, the old Democratic males that were not being heard, those working class males voted, enough of them voted progressive to really flip the election and go into the progressives' favor. So, the fundamental question facing Democrats is whether they're willing to change course, or will they double down on strategies that are failing. Right now, they are doubling down. Earlier signs suggest many party leaders would rather blame voters than examine their own approach. And this is where they go wrong again. There's $20 million they spent on Speaking with American Men project. Democrats need to attempt to study male voter behavior. It reveals both the party's desperation and its fundamental misunderstanding of the problem. You can't focus group your way out of a crisis that stems from your core messaging and priorities. I also think that not only they should study the male Democrats that have exodus, but talk to the new up and coming, the progressives. Like I said, my boys, they need to talk to them. Say those boys will never vote Democrat, but if they could see, well, this is what these boys care about. This is what turns them off of this party. We need to get to the middle somehow. But instead, they're like, no, you guys are a bunch of idiots. You're just Trump lovers. Like, pretty much go fuck you, and we'll just stay over here on our elitist side over here. And they're not listening to what's going on the other side. Like I said, if it was me, the first place I would go is in the lion's den. I would go to the almost like what Charlie Kirk does. Goes there, let's talk. Tell me your side. Tell me like he goes to the universities and talks to them about their issues and what they like, and goes back and forth and has debates with them. They need to talk. They need to, number one, express their views, but on the conservative side, hey, well, this is where I think that we're going right, and this is where I think you guys are going wrong. There's a discussion, but I find overall the Democratic Party doesn't want to have the discussion. They're at a crossroads that will definitely define American politics for decades to come. They can continue down their current path, which they're doing, prioritizing progressive cultural politics over economic populism. They're lecturing male voters rather than listening to them and hoping demographic changes will eventually deliver victory. Or they can choose the harder path, acknowledging that their approach to male voters has failed catastrophically, and undertaking the painful work of rebuilding these relationships is essential. And the stakes could not be higher. And I don't think they realize that. Without significant male support, Democrats will struggle to win the presidency. They will struggle to control the Congress or implement their policy agendas. they'll become a permanent minority party representing an increasingly narrow slice of American society. But if they can successfully navigate this crisis, if they can rebuild that big tent coalition that I talked about that once made the Americans majority party, they have the potential to dominate American politics for a generation. And their choice is theirs. But the clock is definitely clicking. The midterms are coming up, and every day they wait, more men walk away from the party that once claimed to represent all working Americans. This exodus is real. The question is whether Democrats will keep steaming along the same tide, or are they going to shrink into irrelevance? It will be very interesting to see what happens with the Democratic Party. One, I want to know who the big next leader. What is to me is the most important thing is they need to find a leader that's going to resonate with the base, and base meaning the male voters, the working class male, the suburban males, females. I'm going to do another video about how they've lost what portion of the female vote that they've lost. But it will be very interesting to see how they run this tide. From what I see going on right now is they're doubling down on what's not working. The only gain I think they're gaining is for the people in the MAGA group, that's a whole other topic about the MAGA group getting splintered because of Trump and the Epstein files and everything else. But the only support I see that's coming their way is not so much from what they're doing, but is them getting pissed off with the Trump side and what the MAGA is not doing for them. So they might get some overflow from that. But what I think they need to do and make the big change is to listen to the complaints about their party within their party and move accordingly. They really have to listen. They can't double down on what's not working. Gavin Newsom 100% is not the solution. They need to find a good leader that's going to kind of take them into the next generation. So anyways, guys, let me know your thoughts. I'm very, very interested. I love your comments. It's very enlightening. I learned a lot just from the comments from people and what they're thinking. And again, these are just my opinions, only my thoughts. I like the data. That's why I like to read the data, come from the data, and draw my own opinions on stuff. But it's really based on some facts and where, like I said, the Democrats are doing the data retrieval on their own because they see that there's something wrong. They just don't know how to fix it. But instead of doing something to fix it, they're doubling down on what's not working. So anyway, guys, please like, subscribe, share, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks. Bye.